Imagine a human thousands of years before cities, before writing, before money, before even the first empires. They are sitting near a fire. Someone passes them a strange drink. It tastes sour. It burns a little. It changes how they feel. And for some reason, they want more. But here's the strange part. Alcohol was not supposed to be a human invention. It existed in nature long before humans knew how to make it. So when did humans first discover it? Was it after farming? Was it after the first villages? Or did our relationship with alcohol begin much earlier than civilization itself? To answer that, we have to separate two different moments. The first time our ancestors encountered alcohol, and the first time humans learned how to make it on purpose. Because those are not the same thing. Alcohol existed before cups, before jars, before breweries, and before any human understood fermentation. When ripe fruit falls from a tree and sits on the ground, tiny yeasts begin feeding on the sugars inside. The fruit softens, the smell changes, the taste becomes sharper, and slowly some of those sugars turn into ethanol, in other words, alcohol. Long before any human knew what fermentation was, the forest was already doing chemistry, and animals noticed. Modern primates sometimes eat overripe fruit. Some animals are attracted to the smell of fermentation, and for an ancient primate searching for calories, that smell may have been useful. It could have meant one thing: fruit, soft fruit, sweet fruit, easy energy. But there was a strange side effect. That fruit could also contain alcohol. Not enough to look like a modern drink, not beer, not wine, just small amounts of ethanol inside rotting fruit. But over millions of years, even small things can matter. One study on alcohol metabolism suggested that a major change happened in an enzyme called ADH4 around 10 million years ago, in the lineage leading toward humans and African apes. That enzyme helps break down ethanol. This does not prove ancient apes were getting drunk in the forest. That would be too simple, but it does suggest something important. Our ancestors may have been exposed to alcohol long before humans existed, so the first answer is strange. Humans may not have discovered alcohol as a drink first. Our deeper ancestors may have encountered it as food. A smell in the forest, a sweet, rotten fruit, a chemical accident that the body slowly learned to handle. But that still leaves the bigger question. When did humans stop finding alcohol by accident and start making it on purpose? For that, we have to jump much closer to our own species. Not millions of years ago, thousands. One of the most important clues comes from Rakafet Cave, near modern-day Haifa in Israel. Inside the cave, archaeologists found stone mortars connected to the Natufian culture. The Natufians lived around 13,000 years ago. And what makes them fascinating is that they were not full farmers yet. They were hunter-gatherers. They collected wild plants. They hunted animals. They lived before the full agricultural world that later changed everything. But in those stone mortars, researchers found evidence that grains like wheat and barley had been processed in ways linked to brewing. The grains had been soaked, they had begun to germinate, they had been crushed, and they had fermented. That means some of the earliest known evidence for man-made alcohol may come from people who were not even farming yet. Think about that. Before massive cities, before kings, before written laws, before coins or markets, people may have already been making a kind of beer. And probably not because they wanted a casual drink after work. The cave was connected to burial activity. So this early alcohol may have been part of ritual, part of gathering, part of remembering the dead. Maybe people came together, shared food, shared drink, and created moments that felt bigger than daily survival. Alcohol may have started as something social and spiritual before it became something ordinary. But it was probably not like modern beer. It may have been thick, cloudy, low in alcohol, more like a fermented grain mixture than the clear drink people imagine today. Still, the basic idea was there. And this is what makes early alcohol so interesting. It was not just about getting drunk. For people living before farms and cities, a fermented drink could mean many things at once. It could bring a group together. It could mark a burial, a feast, or a special gathering. It could turn ordinary grain into something unusual, something shared, something remembered. And maybe that is why people kept doing it, because alcohol changes more than the body, it changes the moment. A normal night near a fire becomes a gathering. A meal becomes a ritual. A group of people becomes a community with a shared memory. So when we talk about the beginning of alcohol, we are not only talking about chemistry, we are talking about one of the earliest ways humans may have turned food, feeling, and social life into culture. Take plants full of sugar or starch. let nature transform them, then drink the result. A few thousand years later, the evidence becomes even clearer. At Jiahu, a Neolithic village in China, archaeologists found pottery jars with chemical traces of a fermented drink. This was around 9,000 years ago, and it was not just one ingredient. It seems to have been made from rice, honey, and fruit such as hawthorn or grape. That is important because it shows people were not just stumbling into fermentation anymore. They were combining ingredients. They were experimenting. They were learning what worked. At this point, alcohol was not just an accident of rotten fruit. It was becoming technology, a recipe, a controlled transformation. And once humans understood fermentation, alcohol began appearing everywhere. Different regions used different ingredients. Grain became beer, grapes became wine, honey became mead. Rice, fruits, dates, palms, and other plants all became possible sources. People did not need to understand microbes to use them. They only needed to notice the pattern. Leave the right mixture alone in the right conditions and it changes. It becomes sour. It bubbles. It smells different. It affects the body. And once a group discovers that, the knowledge can spread. From parent to child, from village to village, from ritual to feast, from feast to tradition. By the time ancient civilizations appeared, alcohol was no longer strange. It was built into life. In ancient Egypt, beer was not just a party drink. It was food. It was payment. It was part of religious offerings. It was connected to medicine. Workers could receive beer and bread as rations because beer provided calories and nutrients, and it was a normal part of the diet. In Mesopotamia, too, beer was recorded in some of the earliest writing systems. That means alcohol was there almost as soon as civilization began writing things down. But the most interesting part is this. Alcohol did not wait for civilization. It was already waiting at the door. Nature made it first. Ancient primates may have smelled it in fallen fruit. Early humans may have tasted it by accident. Hunter-gatherers learned to make it before full farming. Neolithic villagers turned it into recipes. And civilizations turned it into wages, rituals, medicine, offerings, and daily life. So when did humans start drinking alcohol? There is no single first cup. There is a chain. Millions of years ago, our ancestors may have encountered alcohol in fermented fruit. Around 13,000 years ago, people were likely making fermented grain drinks on purpose. Around 9,000 years ago, we find chemical evidence for more complex alcoholic recipes. And after that, alcohol became part of the machinery of civilization itself. But maybe the deeper answer is not a date. Maybe the deeper answer is that humans did not simply invent alcohol. We discovered a process nature had already been using for millions of years. Then, we learned to control it. We turned rotten fruit into ritual, wild grain into beer, fermentation into culture, and eventually a chemical accident on the forest floor became one of the oldest human traditions on Earth. And if you enjoy stories like this, the strange history of humans, evolution, ancient life, and the things we almost never think about, make sure to like the video and subscribe. There are many more weird questions to explore, and sometimes the oldest human stories begin in the most unexpected places.